It was 8:47 a.m. on a crisp October morning in 2024, and I was out on the porch of my cabin in Willow Creek, a quiet little spot nestled along the banks of the Green River in Oregon. The air smelled of wet leaves and cedar, and the only sound was the soft clink of my coffee mug as I set it down to stack firewood. At 68, I'd earned these moments of peace. This cabin wasn't just a house site, it was my refuge, built with my own hands after 35 years as a firefighter. My wife, Ellen, and I had dreamed of growing old here, but 4 years after her passing, it was just me and the memories etched into every knot in the wood. That peace shattered when the front door took a pounding, not a knock, but a full-on assault, like someone was trying to break it down. My old firefighter instincts kicked in. You don't hammer a door like that unless something's seriously wrong. I wiped my hands on my jeans, expecting an emergency, but when I opened the door, there was no fire, no crisis, just Margaret Hensley, the HOA president, her face twisted with fury. Margaret didn't wait for an invitation. She stormed into my living room, her heels clicking on the hardwood, clutching a stack of papers like they were a loaded gun. The smell of her floral perfume and stale coffee trailed her like a bad mood. "James," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to slice through steel, "this is your last chance. No more warnings." She slammed the papers onto my oak coffee table, scattering them like leaves in a storm. At the top of the first page, in bold, angry letters, were the words "Final Notice of Violation," circled in red ink. $18,500. I stared at her, then at the papers. I'd lived here for 20 years, paid my taxes on time, kept my yard pristine. The HOA had never been an issue beyond a nitpicky note about a bush that needed trimming. An $18,500 fine? It wasn't just wrong, it was absurd. I picked up the top sheet. It listed a litany of supposed violations. My deck, built by Ellen's dad in the 80s from redwood that'd outlast us all, was non-compliant with Section 7, subsection B. My roof was the wrong shade of gray. My mailbox light, a tiny solar bulb my grandson gave me, as a public safety hazard. None of it made sense. The deck predated the HOA. The roof was slate gray, same as always. The mailbox light barely glowed enough to scare a firefly. Margaret stood there, arms crossed, smirking like she'd already won. "You've got 24 hours to pay, James," she said, her voice dripping with rehearsed venom. "If you don't, we'll slap a lien on this place and start foreclosure." Frankly, I'd start packing. The audacity hit me like a punch. This cabin was where I'd raised my kids, where Ellen and I had danced in the kitchen to old jazz records. And now this woman was trying to take it away over a lie. I didn't yell. In a fire, you don't fight flames with more heat, you find the source and smother it. "Margaret," I said, keeping my voice steady, "that's a big claim and a lot of money. I'll need to see the official records board minutes, prior notices, the bylaws that list these rules." Her smirk flickered, just for a second. She hadn't expected me to stay calm or ask for proof. "We sent you the notices weeks ago," she snapped, waving at the papers. "This is it. Pay or get out." But I was already looking at her documents, and that's when I spotted a tiny mistake that changed everything. The paper was cheap, like something from a discount store. The HOA letterhead was blurry, like a bad photocopy. The state seal in the corner was wrong. Oregon's seal has a heart-shaped shield, but this one was a generic starburst, something you'd find in a clip-art library. The font jumped sizes mid-sentence, and the two signatures at the bottom looked like they were scrawled by the same hand. This wasn't a notice, it was a fake, and a sloppy one at that. After Margaret left, the silence in my cabin felt heavier than her shouting. Those papers sat on my table like a poison I couldn't ignore. This place was my life. Every scratch on the floor, every creak in the stairs held a piece of Ellen. To think someone could barge in and threaten that with a stack of lies. It wasn't just personal, it was a crime. I went to my study, pulled open the filing cabinet, and dug through 20 years of records. Firefighters document everything, every call, every inspection, and I'd kept that habit. There was the 1984 permit for the deck, signed by a county inspector. The receipt for the roof shingles, clearly marked slate gray. My property taxes, paid in full, stamped by the county. Every one of Margaret's accusations was a fabrication, and I had the paper to prove it. By noon, I called the county clerk's office. A cheerful woman named Susan answered. "Good morning, Mr. Harper. she said after I gave my name and address. Your property at 214 Riverbend Road? Clean as a whistle. No fines, no violations, taxes all paid. I thanked her and hung up, feeling a flicker of hope. But hope is a fragile thing. That afternoon, I heard Margaret's voice again, this time from my neighbor Tom's porch down the street. James is a deadbeat, she said loudly, fake concern oozing from her words. Owes the community $18,500 and counting. He's dragging us all down. My blood ran cold. She wasn't just coming for my home, she was poisoning my name, turning my neighbors against me. This was no mistake. It was a calculated attack. I bought a notebook that evening and started logging everything. Margaret's uninvited entry at 8:47 a.m., her exact words, the fake papers. I began carrying my phone to snap pictures. The next day, I caught her lurking near my property line, staring at my cabin like a predator. Clicked-stamped evidence. The day after, she was on my deck, pointing at it like she was building a case. Another photo. By week's end, I had a folder labeled Evidence with photos and screenshots of her emails to the neighborhood, each one more aggressive, each one with a slightly different version of her fake notice. One said the fine was due immediately. Another gave a deadline of October 31st. A third, slipped to me by a nervous board member named Clara, listed the fine as $18,000 and due in 10 days. The lies couldn't even stay consistent. The HOA called a mandatory meeting at the community center on a chilly Wednesday evening, October 16, 2024, at 6:30 p.m. The room smelled of burnt coffee and bleach, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Neighbors sat in folding chairs, avoiding eye contact, the air thick with tension. Margaret stood at the front, flanked by two board members, holding her forged notice like a trophy. James Harper has racked up $18,500 in fines, she declared, painting me as a menace who was tanking their property values. When she offered me a chance to speak, I stood, manila folder in hand, and faced my neighbors. I've lived here 20 years, I said calmly. Here's what the county clerk says: no fines, no violations. I laid out the official record, then my permits and receipts, each one a brick in my defense. Finally, I spread out Margaret's 3 notices, pointing out the mismatched dates, amounts, and signatures. These aren't notices, I said. They're forgeries. The room erupted in murmurs. Margaret's face turned crimson. He's lying, she shrieked. But her desperation only made her look guiltier. She stormed out, vowing to call the sheriff. She did. On October 22, 2024, at 9:15 a.m., a sheriff's car rolled into my driveway. Sheriff Daniels, a no-nonsense man in his 60s, stepped out, holding one of Margaret's fake notices. I invited him in for coffee and laid out my evidence. He studied the papers, his jaw tightening. This letterhead's a joke, he said, tapping the blurry logo. And these signatures? Same handwriting. This is fraud, plain and simple. He took the notices and promised to follow up. The next morning, a garish yellow sign appeared on my lawn. Property in violation. Foreclosure pending. It was Margaret's last stab at shaming me, but it backfired. Neighbors rallied. Tom, a retired architect, analyzed the notices and debunked every claim, citing non-existent codes and legal loopholes. She's making it up, he said, shaking his head. The final showdown came on October 25, 2024, at 8:55 a.m. Margaret's SUV screeched to a stop, and she marched to my door, banging with deliberate menace. James, your time's up, she shouted. The sheriff's with me. Pack or be dragged out. I didn't open the door. Instead, I dialed the state attorney's fraud division on speakerphone, loud enough for her and the gathering neighbors to hear. Investigator Patel, a calm voice answered. I read off the case number Sheriff Daniels had given me. We've confirmed the notices are fraudulent, Patel said. A warrant's been issued for Margaret Hensley's arrest, forgery, extortion, harassment. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Margaret froze, her face ashen. 2 patrol cars pulled up, lights flashing. Sheriff Daniels read her rights as deputies cuffed her. The click of the handcuffs was quiet but final, echoing across the street. She was led away, defeated, her lies exposed. The HOA was dissolved within days, exposed as Margaret's personal scam. Refunded fines arrived in mailboxes, and my cabin was mine again. This morning, I'm on my deck, the river sparkling under the October sun. Margaret thought power came from shouting and fake papers, but she was wrong. Power is patience, a logbook, a receipt. It's the truth, steady and unshakable. What would you do if someone tried to take your home with a lie? Would you fight like I did, or would you pack up and walk away? And what about the neighbors? Should they have stepped in sooner, or was their silence just human nature? Drop a comment, hit that like button, and subscribe. I want to hear your take on this.